They thought Earth's gravity was a joke, until it broke their armies, crushed their warships, and turned their invasion into a graveyard. Gravity. It was the first enemy we ever knew. Before we had names for the stars, before we forged fire or sharpened stone, there was weight, the relentless pull of our world on our bones, our muscles, our blood. Every step was resistance training. Every breath a battle against the invisible hand dragging us downward. On Earth, nothing came easy. Survival was earned. Our bodies grew dense, our hearts strong, our reflexes sharpened by the constant demand of moving through a crushing embrace we could never escape. That is why they never understood us. The Krex Dominion saw Earth as a prison. To them, a home world, with a surface gravity of 1G was already absurdly high. Their own worlds, pale, slow-turning spheres with gentle pulls of 0.3G, bred tall, delicate frames. They could leap like birds, glide through their cities without effort. They thought themselves blessed. And when they looked at us, they saw something grotesque. Short, stocky creatures, shackled to a world that punished them with every movement. To the Krex, we were malformed, crude, slow, and they made sure to tell us so. I remember the council hall, an echoing chamber of glass and light that hung above the capital of Varus Prime. We had come to discuss trade disputes, but the Krex delegation had other ideas. The holoscreens above the chamber flashed a series of grotesque caricatures, humans struggling to stand, lumbering in comical slow motion. The Krex representative, slender and shining in ceremonial armor, spoke with a voice loud enough for the translators to catch every dripping syllable. "Your kind clings to that heavy rock like mollusks to a reef," he said, smiling with a mouthful of needle-like teeth. "Perhaps if you ever shed the weight of your planet, you might evolve into something worth notice." The chamber erupted in alien laughter. Representatives from other worlds joined in. Not out of malice, but because the Krex's arrogance was infectious. In the galaxy's mind, we were the punchline. Beside me, Ambassador Reese sat motionless, his jaw set like stone. His knuckles whitened where his hand gripped the table. When the jeers died down, he leaned toward me. Not for the translators, not for the recorders, but just for me. His voice was low, steady, cold. "One day," he said, "they'll understand." We finished the summit with forced smiles and polite words, as all diplomats do. But the sting was deep. Every broadcast from Krex space after that seemed to carry another jab. News feeds showing humans in powered exosuits, the captions mocking us. "Even with machines, they still move like they're drowning." Military. Analysts on galactic channels declared we would never be a serious power. Too slow to maneuver, too inefficient in space combat, too tied to our homeworld's gravity to adapt. And perhaps they were right, for a time. We kept to ourselves mostly. Humanity had only been in the wider galactic community for 70 years. Our colonies were scattered, our fleets smaller than any major powers. We traded in minerals, heavy engineering, and high-density manufacturing, the few areas where our natural strength and Earth's crushing conditions gave us an edge. The galaxy saw us as specialists, niche contributors, not warriors. But what they didn't see, what they couldn't see, was that the same thing they mocked was the very thing that would one day break them. Gravity had shaped us. It had forged in us an endurance they couldn't comprehend. A Krex soldier on a 0.3G world could run for hours without tiring. On Earth, you learned to fight for breath in a single sprint. A Krex could leap several meters, with a light push. We learned to plant our feet, to brace against forces they had never felt. And our bodies. Our bodies were built to endure weight they couldn't imagine. I didn't know it then, but the day in the council hall was the beginning. The moment they laughed, they started writing the story of their own defeat. Not that we planned revenge. Not then. But humiliation has a way of planting seeds. seeds that grow in quiet beneath the surface until the day they split the ground open. That night, on the transport back to Earth, the delegation was silent for hours. Outside the viewport, the stars drifted by in their slow, eternal crawl. Finally, one of the younger envoys spoke. "They don't even think we're a threat," she said, her voice caught between anger and disbelief. Reese turned to her with that same unreadable expression he'd worn in the hall. "Good," he said. "Let them keep thinking that." The galaxy would keep laughing for a while longer. The Kreks would keep broadcasting their jokes, their animated skits of humans crushed under absurdly oversized weights. And we, the heavy world cripples, would keep building ships no one feared, training soldiers no one worried about, and studying the biology of every species that mocked us. Because on Earth, we learn early that you don't need to move fast to win a fight. You just need to be the one still standing when it's over. That truth was coming for them. They didn't know it yet. And maybe we didn't either. But in the silence after their laughter, the countdown had already begun. The first strike came without warning. No declaration, no formal war notice, just the shriek of distress calls from Varela Colony. One moment, the outer mining settlement was transmitting routine cargo manifests. The next, its orbital defense. Grid was torn open, stations reduced to molten debris by the Krex Dominion's opening salvo. The attackers descended in sleek, needle-shaped warships, bristling with weapons far beyond the colony's capacity to resist. In less than an hour, Varela's skies were theirs. The Krex hadn't chosen Varela at random. It was a low-gravity colony, barely 0.6 G, populated largely by civilians and lightly armed militia. To the Dominion, it was the perfect target, a place to make an example without serious risk. Their soldiers, bred for worlds even lighter than Varela, moved effortlessly in the thin pull, leaping over barricades and vaulting rooftops as they advanced through the colony's streets. The defenders fought bravely, but the mismatch was absolute. Human troops were used to moving under a constant drag that no longer existed here. Without the familiar weight grounding them, their movements became awkward, their aim less steady. Refugee ships crammed with the lucky few who escaped jumped toward Earth space, carrying stories of the slaughter. They spoke of Krex troops laughing, as they advanced, of civilian shelters torn apart to show that the heavy worlders can't protect their own. One pilot described a Krex commander broadcasting over the colony's emergency frequency. "If this is the best gravity's children can do, your worlds will fall in weeks." Earth demanded intervention from the Galactic Council. The appeal was met with hollow words. The Council claimed the Krex attack was a localized border dispute, not an act of war. When pressed, representatives from other worlds shifted, uncomfortably in their seats. No one wanted to challenge the Krex. Their fleets were vast, their influence deep. And besides, why risk lives for a species that, in the galactic view, could not possibly win? In military briefings, the analysis was grim. The Krex dominated low and mid-gravity battlefields. Their armor was lighter, their weapons optimized for speed over force. In space, their warships were agile and precise, darting through combat zones like predatory fish. Humanity's strengths, brute strength, endurance under heavy load, meant little in the void or on worlds where the fight was decided by maneuverability. Still, the attack could not go unanswered. The First Fleet was dispatched to intercept Krex movements near the neighboring colony of Carthan Station. The encounter lasted less than 15 minutes. Outnumbered and outgunned, our ships were forced into retreat. Krex forces pursued them, partway before withdrawing, content to let the humans limp away. It wasn't just victory for them, it was theater. The Dominion wanted the galaxy to see the heavy worlders humiliated in real time. The psychological damage was as sharp as the physical losses. For decades, humanity had endured the quiet mockery of other species. Now the ridicule was no longer quiet. Across galactic news channels, Krex commentators replayed footage of our retreat from Carthan, slowed down for comedic effect. One broadcast, cut between our ships pulling back and ancient human footage of deep-sea creatures sinking into the abyss. The message was clear. Under pressure, we always sank. On Earth, the mood shifted. The jokes were no longer something to brush aside. Parents spoke in whispers about evacuation protocols. Recruitment surged in the military, not out of patriotism, but out of the desperate need to prove that we could fight. But proving it against the Krex meant surviving an enemy who had already chosen the battlefield to suit themselves. The Krex continued their advance. Small colonies vanished from contact grids, their coordinates erased from official charts as if they had never existed. Supply convoys vanished in deep space, their wreckage later broadcast on Krex channels with triumphant music. The Dominion wasn't just conquering territory, they were building a narrative, one where humanity was the hapless, stumbling prey. In one intercepted Krex communique, a high-ranking officer summarized their strategy with chilling brevity. "We will hit them where they are weakest, until they have nowhere left to stand." The statement was later repeated as a rallying slogan across Krex-controlled systems. Inside Earth's war councils, frustration boiled. Our fleets could not meet the Krex in open space and win. Our colonies were scattered too far to reinforce each other effectively, and every victory the Dominion claimed fed the growing belief among neutral powers that resistance was pointless. The more they laughed, the more that belief hardened into policy. Still, there were voices that refused to be silenced. Reports from survivors revealed small details that most analysts overlooked. Krex soldiers, when forced into extended hand-to-hand combat, fatigued faster than expected. On heavier worlds, those few where we had minor skirmishes, their armor required reinforcement and their movements slowed. But these were scraps of observation buried under mountains of bad news, and no one in the room wanted to wager a war on scraps. And yet, some of us began to wonder. Not all battles are fought where the enemy chooses. The Krex had made their point on low-gravity worlds, on terrain that suited their grace and agility. They had shown the galaxy how easily they could humiliate the heavy worlders. But their arrogance was showing cracks. They believed their victories were inevitable, that humanity's resilience was an illusion. They had not yet considered what might happen if the ground itself turned against them. For the moment, we had no answer. Only losses, humiliation, and the slow tightening of the Krex's grip. But beneath the grief, beneath the fear, the same quiet resolve that had formed in the council hall years before began to take shape again. The Dominion had chosen the first battlefield. They would not choose the last. The war room beneath Geneva was sealed from the world above, its thick walls humming faintly with the energy of secure comms and power grids buried deep in the bedrock. Around the central table, the highest-ranking officers of Earth's militaries stood in silence as the last transmission from Carthan Station played out. The recording ended with static and a brief flash of an enemy warship, its sleek frame angling toward the fleeing human fleet before cutting away. The silence that followed was heavier than the air in the room. General Hale broke it first. His voice was steady, but there was no disguising the weight in it. "We can't meet them where they want to fight. If we keep reacting, we're finished, before the year's out." No one argued. Every analysis agreed. In space, the Krex held all the advantages. Their maneuverability, their weapon precision, their experience in low to mid-gravity theaters, all of it rendered our fleets too slow, too predictable. Matching their strategy was suicide. The only way forward was to force them into conditions they couldn't adapt to, conditions where their physiology became a liability instead of a strength. It was Dr. Kira Shaw, chief of the Defense Research Directorate, who put it into words that changed the course of the war. "We've been trying to win in their element. That's not strategy. That's pride. Our real weapon isn't in our ships. It's in our blood, our bones, our lungs. They've mocked our gravity since the day we joined the Council. It's time to make them face it. She laid out the data. Krex muscle fibers designed for efficiency and low pull collapsed under sustained heavy load. Their circulatory systems, adapted for weak gravitational strain, faltered under the demands of high-G exertion. Past encounters on heavier worlds had been short and rare, but even in those, their combat effectiveness dropped sharply after minutes of intense fighting. They could engineer exosuits to compensate, but the strain on both machinery and operator would be catastrophic over time. The proposal was simple in concept, impossible in pride. Stop chasing the Krex, stop defending low-gravity worlds, and instead, lure them to battle on a world where gravity itself became the battlefield. Hale understood instantly. "We make them come to us," he said, "and we make sure they regret it." Planning began in earnest. Intelligence identified a handful of human-controlled planets with the necessary environmental advantage: high gravity, rugged terrain, defensible structures. The choice settled on Vortan 4, a mining colony with a surface gravity of 2.5 G, already home to workers hardened by years of labor under crushing conditions. If the Krex could be convinced that something of immense strategic value was hidden there, they would commit ground forces, and once they set foot on that surface, their own bodies would become their enemy. The next weeks were a frenzy of preparation. Soldiers were recalled from scattered postings and placed into specialized endurance drills. Weighted exosuits were pushed to their limits, then beyond, until every soldier could move in full combat load as if it were an extension of themselves. Gravity chambers ran non-stop, simulating conditions even more punishing than Vortan 4, until recruits learned to fight while their hearts pounded like war drums and their muscles screamed with fatigue. Our engineering corps transformed Vortan 4 into a fortress hidden in plain sight. Beneath the mines, reinforced bunkers took shape, stocked with supplies for months of siege. Defensive positions were dug into the rock itself, camouflaged from orbit. Weapon emplacements were designed to withstand the constant strain of the planet's pull, their recoil dampening systems recalibrated for brutal close-range combat. Every corridor, every choke point, every ambush zone was chosen with one goal: to make every meter the Krex advanced cost them more than they could afford. Meanwhile, a misinformation campaign unfolded. Encrypted transmissions, crafted to appear as secure military chatter, hinted at a massive experimental weapons cache on Vortan 4. The Krex were meant to believe that humanity was hiding a trump card there, one that could turn the war if discovered. Leaks were accidentally intercepted by known Krex informants. False freighter movements were staged, carrying containers that looked from a distance like weapons components, but contained nothing but mining slag. Every move was designed to bait the Dominion's arrogance. Alien intelligence reports inevitably reached their commanders. The idea of striking a decisive blow on a high-gravity world didn't intimidate them. It thrilled them. The Dominion's upper ranks saw it as a chance to show that even the heart of humanity's so-called strength could be crushed under their discipline and technology. And most importantly, they believed we were desperate enough to try hiding our future in a single planet. The moment confirmation came that Krex fleets were shifting toward the sector, final preparations began. Civilian miners on Vortan 4 were evacuated under the guise of temporary safety drills, leaving behind a force of volunteer veterans to guide incoming troops through the terrain. Every soldier knew the risks. No one expected reinforcements. This was not a battle we would run from. It was one we would finish, or not at all. Even as the trap was being set, we kept our broader fleet movements erratic and restrained. Avoiding engagements that might spook the Krex, they needed to believe we were on the back foot, still scrambling, still hoping to hold a single defensive line. The Dominion's arrogance would do the rest. Dr. Shaw was present in the final war briefing before deployment. She looked at the assembled soldiers, all carrying themselves with the dense, grounded posture of earth-born troops, and said only one thing: "You were made for this fight before you were born. Every step you've ever taken on our world has been training for the one you're about to take. They think they know gravity. Show them they don't." Orders were given. Ships departed under strict communication blackout. And somewhere far beyond our reach, Krek's commanders were already congratulating themselves on the victory they believed was inevitable. They thought they understood the cost of war. They hadn't yet felt the weight of it. The transmissions began quietly, slipping into the outer channels of the Krek's Dominion's listening posts, like whispers carried on static. At first, they were fragments, coded signals referencing unusual shipments, encrypted orders to divert freighters toward a remote high-gravity world on the fringes of human-controlled space. The name Vortan 4 appeared enough times to catch the attention of Dominion analysts, always in contexts that suggested urgency and secrecy. Then came the bait in full. A heavily encrypted burst, deliberately clumsy in its masking, described the transport of critical weapons-grade prototypes to Vortan 4's underground facilities. The wording was chosen to ignite suspicion. Weapons-grade, prototypes, underground. Every phrase was calibrated to play on the Dominion's belief that humans were hiding something powerful, and hiding it where they believed themselves strongest. 2. Any impartial observer, the choice of location should have seemed strange. Vortan 4 was infamous even among human miners for its crushing 2.5G surface gravity. Simply walking across its rocky plains could leave an untrained visitor gasping for air. But to the Kreks, this was nothing but another opportunity to prove their superiority. Reports filtered up to their fleet commanders, painting a picture of a desperate species burying its last hopes under tons of rock and planetary weight. They saw not a trap, but an invitation to finish the war in one decisive blow. Their preparations began at once. Krek's ground forces underwent rushed gravity acclimation drills in specialized chambers. The sessions were poorly designed, mimicking 1.2 Dre at most, barely half of what awaited them on Vortan 4. Engineers were ordered to modify exoskeletons and armor to reinforce joints and augment mobility under heavier pull. The modifications worked in testing, but the strain on the servos was far greater than the Dominion's quartermasters were willing to admit. From orbit, Vortan 4 looked unremarkable, a sphere of dull red stone streaked with black veins of ore. Its atmosphere thin but breathable with minimal filtration. Mining platforms dotted the surface, connected by rugged vehicle tracks and deep shafts plunging into the crust. What the Kreks did not know was that beneath those shafts lay reinforced bunkers cut directly into the bedrock, linked by tunnels designed to withstand both the crushing gravity and sustained bombardment. Every path that led toward the supposed weapons cache had been mapped for ambushes. Every approach route was mined. Human forces on the planet had been ordered into complete radio silence. No signals left the surface except the ones crafted to be intercepted. Patrols moved only under cover of darkness, when the thin atmosphere scattered less light and reduced the risk of detection from orbit. The defensive network was complete and waiting, silent, patient, and unmoving. From the moment the Kreks fleet crossed into the system, the human ships positioned at the edge of the sector began the final phase of the deception. A small task force moved in to intercept, made a show of engaging briefly, then broke away in what appeared to be another panicked retreat. The Krek's commanders read it exactly as intended, a desperate attempt to protect the Vortan 4 cache before abandoning it. Their pursuit was immediate. The Dominion fleet entered orbit with confidence, their tactical chatter almost celebratory. They expected to encounter scattered resistance at most, a few fortified positions to be cleared before claiming whatever spoils they imagined lay hidden below. Orbital scans confirmed the presence of underground structures and power signatures, but nothing that looked like mass defenders. In truth, The scans were being deliberately manipulated by human jammers, allowing only what we wanted them to see. On the surface, soldiers lay in wait. The gravity pressed on their bodies like an old, familiar hand. But they moved with the ease of lifelong training. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Every man and woman knew their role, every kill zone pre-assigned. There was no chatter, no bravado. Only the deep, steady breathing of fighters who understood that the battle to come would be decided not in minutes, but in the slow grind of endurance. Above them, the Kreks prepared their landing craft. Pilots adjusted descent vectors, ignoring the minor warnings from their navigation systems about stress tolerances in high-gravity conditions. The extra weight would, in their minds, slow them slightly, but not enough to matter. After all, they were the Kreks Dominion, conquerors of dozens of worlds. They had fought in atmospheres thick with methane, in volcanic ash storms, on frozen moons. To them, a little more weight was a novelty, not a threat. The first wave of landers broke atmosphere, their hulls heating under the friction of descent. The engines strained harder than anticipated, but still they pushed through. From the ground, only faint streaks of light betrayed their approach. The Dominion had brought numbers, more than enough to overwhelm any reasonable defense if the fight were taking place anywhere else. But Vortan 4 was not anywhere else. As the landers touched down, the Kreks soldiers within prepared to step into what they believed was another easy victory. None of them could feel yet the subtle shift in their own bodies, the way their hearts were already working harder, the way each breath drew just a fraction less air than they expected. They didn't know that every extra kilogram their armor carried was a small anchor tugging them toward exhaustion. They would know soon enough. The first boots hit the surface with a metallic thud that sounded heavier than the Krek soldiers expected. They stepped out of the landers with practiced precision, but the ground beneath them pushed back harder than any world they had fought on. The red dust of Vortan 4 clung to their boots as they advanced, their exoskeleton servos humming at a slightly higher pitch to compensate for the constant drag of the planet's pull. It was subtle at first, nothing they couldn't overcome. But it was there, an invisible hand pressing down on every movement. Their initial formation spread across the landing zone, scanning for movement. Orbital intelligence had warned them of minor resistance from scattered human units. They expected quick skirmishes, perhaps some booby traps, before the enemy broke and ran. What they found instead was silence, the kind that sinks into the bones. The horizon shimmered under the thin atmosphere, the jagged ridges of Vortan's mining fields rising in the distance like the teeth of a buried predator. They began their advance toward the suspected bunker entrances. The first 100 meters were nothing. The second 100 came slower. The terrain sloped upward, subtle enough that it wouldn't have mattered anywhere else, but here each step stole a fraction more stamina. Breathing became a little less casual. The weight of their rifles felt exaggerated, as though some unseen mechanic had slipped dense metal into their frames. None of them spoke about it. The Kreks were proud, and pride is stubborn. The first shot broke that silence, a single crack from somewhere in the ridges ahead, and the lead Kreks officer stumbled, a fist-sized hole through the chest plate. His body hit the dirt with a dull, heavy impact. A second shot followed before the squad could react, dropping another soldier mid-step. The return fire was immediate but unfocused, bolts of plasma streaking upward toward the ridgelines where nothing visible moved. The Kreks advanced faster, unwilling to stall under sniper fire, but the incline and the gravity combined into an invisible wall. Their boots sank deeper into the dust. Armor servos began to whine under the strain of sustained uphill movement. Some soldiers shifted to a bounding advance, leaping to close distance. Quickly, only to land harder than expected, the impact rattling teeth and jolting knees. Every leap cost more energy than the one before. When they finally reached the first ridge, they found no humans waiting, only the scorched marks of long vacated positions. The snipers had already moved deeper into the maze of high ground. A faint transmission crackled over the Krek's comms. "Welcome to Vortan." The voice was human, calm, deliberate, and gone before it could be traced. Determined to flush out the defenders, the Kreks pushed forward again. But now the high gravity began to speak in harsher tones. Their movements grew sluggish. One soldier tripped on loose rock. The weight of his armor dragged him face first into the dust, and it took two others to haul him upright. The environmental systems in their suits compensated for temperature, but not for the relentless muscular burn that came with every step. Their heart rates climbed steadily, the bio readouts flashing quiet warnings on helmet displays. From hidden positions in the rocks ahead, human fire teams watched them strain. Every squad leader had been drilled on the same tactic. Don't waste ammunition on the first targets you see. Let the weight do its work. The Kreks' own bodies were already softening them up. A sudden burst of human gunfire erupted from the left flank, concentrated and surgical. A Krek's heavy weapons operator crumpled, the massive cannon in his hands twisting as it struck the ground. Another soldier tried to pivot to cover the gap, but the motion was slow, deliberate, too deliberate. A second volley cut him down before he could fire. The survivors returned fire, but every shot came with a cost in effort. When the Krek's commander called for a regroup, the formation's cohesion had already begun to fray. Soldiers arrived at the rally point in staggered order, their breathing harsh over the comms. Several removed their helmets briefly to suck in the thin air more greedily, only to find it didn't bring the relief they wanted. Their exosuits, once silent extensions of their bodies, now sounded like laboring machines with every step. And still, no human force had committed to a full engagement. The defenders withdrew deeper each time contact was made, forcing the Kreks to keep chasing uphill, through tighter passes and over ridges that demanded more from legs already burning with fatigue. The planet's gravity wasn't an obstacle they could bypass. It was an opponent that never stopped pressing. The commander's frustration began to show in his orders. He pushed them harder, determined to break through the outer defenses quickly. That decision cost them. In one narrow pass, concealed charges detonated under the lead walkers, collapsing the path into a rock slide that swallowed half a squad. The survivors scrambled to pull their comrades free, but even lifting rubble became an exhausting chore. Every motion felt like hauling their own body twice over. By the time they reached visual range of the first true human bunker, they were already slower, already breathing as though they'd been fighting for hours. They expected the defenders to be equally worn. They were wrong. The first human soldiers they saw stepped out from cover with the easy, grounded confidence of people entirely at home under the crushing pull of the planet. They moved without strain, their weapons steady, their eyes calm. For a moment, the Kreks hesitated, not out of fear, but from the sudden realization that the battlefield itself was not theirs. The humans didn't waste that moment. The first real clash came with no warning. One moment the Kreks were advancing, their boots dragging through the dust, the next a coordinated storm of fire swept through their formation. Human weapons cracked in rapid bursts, precise and relentless, chewing into armor plates already stressed by the planet's unyielding pull. The Kreks had trained for hostile fire before, but here every instinct to dive for cover or return a shot was slowed, their own bodies moving against them. They tried to regroup into a defensive wedge, but the humans never gave them a chance. Fire came from multiple angles, short lethal volleys that forced the Kreks to pivot again and again. Each turn was a strain, each adjustment a fraction slower than the last. The humans, lighter in build but perfectly conditioned for this gravity, moved like predators pacing a kill. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. The Krek's commander barked for the heavy plasma repeaters to come online, and they did, slowly. The gunners swung the bulky weapons toward the nearest human position, but the beams cut only into rock and empty space. The humans had already shifted to a new firing point. It became clear to the Krek squad leaders that they weren't chasing individual soldiers. They were being funneled, herded toward an unseen kill zone. A grenade arced in from somewhere above. The detonation was not meant to destroy them outright. It threw up a dense cloud of fine red dust. In this gravity, the particles hung lower, heavier, blinding their optics. Filters strained to keep the grit from choking their suit intakes, and for several seconds their world became muffled static and grinding servos. In that confusion, more Kreks fell, picked off one by one before they could lock on to the attackers. Frustration twisted into something sharper. The Kreks were no strangers to war, but wars had always been fought against enemies who faced the same limits they did. Here, the rules were skewed. Every step the humans took cost them less. Every breath they drew filled their lungs with familiar weight. They could fire, move, and reload in the time it took the Kreks to lift their rifles and steady their aim. The commander finally called for a push, ordering all units to advance through the pass, regardless of fire. The theory was that humans would break under direct pressure, but the theory failed. The narrow pass was a death funnel. Human fire intensified the moment they entered, cutting into their front ranks and forcing the middle ranks to stumble over. The bodies of their own comrades. The Kreks' own mass betrayed them. Trying to move through fallen soldiers in such gravity was like wading through concrete. One squad attempted a flanking maneuver, breaking off to scale a side slope and outflank the defenders. It was a mistake. The slope was treacherous underfoot, and the gravitational pull made every upward lunge cost double the energy. By the time they reached the midpoint, their muscles trembled, and their suits' servos screamed under load. The humans allowed them to climb, then dropped precisely aimed fire that sent them tumbling back down in pieces. Even retreating wasn't simple. The same gravity that slowed their advance now made pulling back under fire a grueling ordeal. Human marksmen targeted joints, hydraulics, and weapon mounts, breaking down the Kreks not just physically but mechanically. Sparks flared, exosuit limbs locked up, and every disabled soldier became a dead weight that others had to decide whether to leave behind. Still, the Kreks kept fighting. Pride drove them, along with the belief that sheer endurance could break any opponent. But endurance meant something different here. For the humans, each burst of movement was a choice, a measured expenditure of energy that they could sustain for hours. For the Kreks, every action felt like moving through a world of lead. And the humans knew it. At one point, the Kreks caught sight of a small human squad directly ahead, an apparent mistake, a gap in their lines. They surged toward it, weapons raised, burning through their remaining strength for the kill. But the humans didn't retreat. They fired a few suppressive bursts, then dropped out of sight. The Kreks followed, straight into a depression in the terrain where the ground tilted upward on all sides. Before they could scramble back up, the ridges around them erupted with human fire. The kill box closed. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds rained down from all angles. Some Kreks tried to return fire, but the effort of lifting weapons to fire uphill drained their strength. Others attempted to charge the slope, only to collapse under the planet's pull before reaching the top. Minutes later, the firing stopped. The humans were gone, leaving behind the wreckage of half a Kreks company. Those who could still move dragged themselves out, slow and silent. The survivors knew now that this was not a battlefield where numbers or raw firepower would decide the day. This was a war in which the ground itself was on the side of their enemy, and the enemy knew exactly how to use it. The Kreks' high command refused to accept the scale of the losses. They poured in reinforcements, not understanding that more troops only meant more bodies for the gravity to claim. Columns of armored soldiers marched into the contested zones, their servos whining from the strain within minutes. They carried more supplies, heavier weapons, and bulkier armor than the first waves, believing mass to be the answer. But every gram of added weight was another chain dragging them toward exhaustion. The humans struck with the same calculated, precision as before, never wasting a shot, never revealing more than a sliver of themselves. Krek's analysts attempted to map human movement patterns, but there were none to predict. Their formations adapted constantly, almost as if they could sense exactly when the enemy was about to commit to a maneuver. Some believed the humans were tapping into the planet's seismic activity to track troop movements. Others suspected a form of battlefield AI. What none of them wanted to admit was that the humans simply knew this terrain in ways no algorithm could match. Their instincts were honed from a lifetime of living under the very weight that now crushed their enemies. In an effort to break the deadlock, the Kreks deployed aerial drones to rain fire from above. The strategy should have worked, but even the drones faltered. Their engines burned hotter, consuming more fuel than anticipated just to stay aloft in the denser atmosphere. Precision targeting faltered when atmospheric drag warped flight paths. Humans exploited this by drawing them into canyons and narrow valleys where the slightest maneuver error would send them crashing into rock. Downed drones were stripped for parts within hours, their components turned into traps and improvised weapons. Morale among the Kreks began to erode. It wasn't just the casualties. It was the realization that they were being outlasted. Their soldiers weren't losing in glorious combat. They were simply wearing down until they made mistakes. Muscles ached constantly, servos overheated, power packs drained twice as fast as predicted. Meals had to be taken more frequently to counter the caloric burn, but even eating became a chore in the thick air. Sleep cycles broke apart as bodies struggled to recover under constant strain. The humans, by contrast, seemed tireless. Their movements were steady, deliberate, never rushed. They would vanish for hours, letting the Kreks stew in tense silence, only to reappear at the moment the enemy's guard began to drop. Every attack was meant to cost the Kreks more than just soldiers. It cost them confidence, cohesion, and the will to advance. A squad that began the day at full readiness might end it half-broken without ever having seen more than a handful of human silhouettes. In desperation, Kreks strategists proposed constructing fortified forward bases to act as staging points. They believed static defenses would give them the stability to operate under these conditions. But building in high gravity was slow, every piece of prefabricated wall or turret requiring triple the manpower and time. The humans allowed these bases to be completed, and then made them into prisons. Once the Kreks were concentrated in fixed positions, the humans cut supply lines with surgical strikes, forcing the defenders to sit and watch their own resources dwindle. When resupply finally came, it was a nightmare. Cargo shuttles had to burn immense amounts of fuel to land and take off, limiting payloads. Supplies were dropped farther from the front to avoid ambush, forcing Kreks convoys to haul them overland, a slow crawl under the planet's pull, making them easy prey. Human raids on these convoys rarely needed to destroy them entirely. Taking out just a few load-bearing vehicles was enough to cripple the whole operation. As weeks passed, the Kreks learned a truth they hadn't wanted to face. The humans weren't simply using the gravity as an obstacle, they were wielding it as a weapon. Every tactic, every maneuver, every delay was calibrated to make the enemy fight the planet itself before they ever fought a soldier. In every skirmish, the humans spent less energy and inflicted more fatigue than they took on themselves. The most chilling reports came from captured Kreks, few though they were. They spoke of human soldiers who seemed utterly at ease in conditions that bent metal frames and shattered alien bones. They described being hunted not with brute force, but with patient inevitability, as though the humans knew from the start how the fight would end. None of these prisoners spoke with defiance. They spoke with the quiet certainty of those who had faced something they could not match. By the 7th week, Krek's leadership faced a choice: continue bleeding soldiers and resources into a war of attrition they could not win, or concede that Earth's defenders had made the very ground their most lethal ally. They delayed the decision, unwilling to admit failure, But in the silence between battles, the truth was clear to every soldier on the ground. This was not a war they could end on their terms. If you want, I can go straight into Section 8 with the same momentum and style so the tension keeps building without a dip. The Krek's High Command attempted one final escalation. They brought in the Titan Walkers, massive siege platforms designed to dominate battlefields across half the galaxy. Each stood on 4 hydraulic legs, each step capable of crushing buildings into rubble. They were shielded, bristling with weaponry, and crewed by elite operators. The Kreks believed these machines would end the stalemate in a single push, but Earth had already claimed them before they arrived. From the moment the walkers set foot on the planet, their weight became their doom. Hydraulic systems screamed under the constant strain, fluid lines burst, and servos overheated within hours. The thick atmosphere and heavier pull slowed their movement to a crawl. Every kilometer forward was a mechanical battle against gravity itself, draining fuel reserves and wearing down components far faster than the engineers had accounted for. The humans didn't need to destroy them outright. They only needed to keep them moving. And so they did, guiding them into narrow valleys, debris-strewn plains, and soft earth that swallowed their feet like quicksand. The walkers became lumbering targets. Precision strikes from portable railguns focused on knee joints and exposed cables, each hit crippling mobility. Repair crews tried working in the field, but under Earth's pull, even lifting a single replacement part required 3 workers and took triple the time. Meanwhile, the humans struck without warning, forcing constant relocations and aborting repairs mid-process. Every delay cost the Kreks, and every hour a walker spent idle was another hour of fuel and morale burned away. As these mechanical behemoths faltered, Krek's command shifted to orbital bombardment. Surely gravity couldn't defend against weapons fired from space. They began precision strikes from low orbit, targeting human strongholds with guided munitions. But Earth's atmosphere proved a silent defender. High-density air layers and gravitational drag degraded targeting accuracy, causing munitions to land off mark or fail to penetrate deeply enough. In some cases, human forces deliberately lured orbital strikes toward decoy installations, letting the Kreks waste their ammunition on empty structures while the real defenders moved unseen through. Underground tunnels. Krek's frustration reached a breaking point. Supply shortages deepened. Fuel reserves ran dangerously low. Replacement parts for exosuits and vehicles were nearly gone, and the planet's conditions made manufacturing on-site impossible. Soldiers were growing gaunt, their armor hanging loose as muscle mass wasted away under relentless strain. Sleep deprivation was rampant. Many could no longer rest properly because even lying down felt like being pinned by an invisible weight. On the human side, the war machine only seemed to grow sharper. Operations became bolder, lasting longer, pressing deeper into enemy territory. Captured enemy tech was repurposed with unnerving speed, turned against its creators in ways the Kreks couldn't predict. Rumors spread among alien troops that humans could dismantle a weapon within hours and return it deadlier than before. Whether true or not, the effect on morale was devastating. Fear took root, not just of the enemy, but of the planet itself. The Kreks Council back home began to fracture. Some argued for total withdrawal, citing the mounting cost in lives and resources. Others insisted on escalation, even proposing the use of planetary-scale weapons, despite the political and environmental risks. Yet each proposal faced the same unspoken reality. Earth had become a trap they could not dismantle without stepping deeper into it. Every action they took to break the humans only strengthened their adversary's grip, the final blow to their campaign's credibility came when a Kreks battalion attempted a high-speed armored thrust to secure a resource-rich basin. The operation began with confidence. The terrain was open, the enemy outnumbered. But within hours, fuel-starved vehicles slowed, treads snapped under strain, and crews were forced to abandon them. By nightfall, the basin had become a graveyard of Kreks machinery, not because the humans had overwhelmed them in direct combat, but because Earth itself had refused to let them pass. By now, every Krex soldier knew the truth their leaders refused to voice. They had underestimated not just a species, but an entire world. They had come expecting to dominate a battlefield. Instead, they were locked in a war where the enemy's greatest weapon was the very ground beneath their feet, and the humans knew exactly how to wield it. The question was no longer if they would lose, but how much they would have to give up before they admitted it. And the humans, patient as the weight of their own world, were content to let the answer come in its own crushing time. I can move straight into Section 9 with this exact pace and escalation, so the downfall feels inevitable, but still tense. The Krex withdrawal began not with an order, but with a quiet breakdown in discipline. Patrols stopped venturing beyond immediate perimeters. Supply convoys started turning back halfway to their destinations. Entire companies, worn down to nothing, abandoned their posts under the cover of darkness, leaving equipment behind. What had once been a unified war effort had dissolved into scattered pockets of survival. Yet the humans did not rush to deliver a final blow. They understood something far more valuable was happening. The Krex were dismantling themselves. Every hesitation, every missed rotation, every abandoned position created a vacuum the humans filled with calculated precision. Strategic routes were secured without resistance. Outposts were seized intact. Intel caches left behind revealed more about Krex fleet operations than months of espionage ever could. It was a war won as much in silence as in fire. Krex leadership, desperate to project strength, tried staging offensives to mask the retreat, but each strike faltered before reaching its objective. Soldiers could barely move under their own gear, much less carry enough ammunition to sustain a firefight. The heavier weapons, the ones that might have tipped engagements, remained in depots, too cumbersome to transport under Earth's pull. And every time the Krex committed to a major movement, the humans were already there, waiting, forcing them to expend what little energy and resources remained. The humans had mastered the tempo. They pressed just hard enough to keep the Krex unstable, never allowing them to consolidate, but never overextending themselves. This balance was deliberate, a slow tightening of the noose. While the Krex fought against Earth's gravity, the humans fought against the Krex will to remain. The latter proved the more decisive battle. Within Krex command channels, the tone shifted from aggression to resignation. Messages became less about victory and more about extraction logistics, how to evacuate without leaving critical assets, how to conceal the scale of losses from rival species, how to ensure that what had begun as a proud military campaign would not be remembered as a humiliation of historic proportions. But no matter the spin they tried to craft, the reality on the ground was undeniable. Morale collapsed entirely when the humans launched a single, well-timed broadcast. It was not a threat, not propaganda, but a simple statement. You are not fighting us. You are fighting Earth. And Earth never surrenders. It reached every Krex soldier's comms. It was repeated, shared, and replayed in whispered conversations. It confirmed what they had all felt in their bones, the crushing weight, the endless exhaustion, the knowledge that their enemy was the planet itself. And unlike any foe they'd faced, this one could not be killed, could not be reasoned with, and could not be escaped without abandoning the war. Desertions increased. Some Krex troops turned themselves in just to escape the strain, preferring captivity to another day of service. Others sabotaged their own equipment to force reassignment off the front lines. Medical facilities were overwhelmed with soldiers, suffering stress fractures, organ strain, and cardiovascular collapse. In the absence of effective treatment, units simply dissolved. The humans capitalized on every crack. Captured soldiers were treated humanely, but always shown the stark difference in conditions, how easily the humans moved, worked, and fought under the same gravity that was breaking their captors. It wasn't taunting. It was demonstration, undeniable proof that this was not an even playing field. For the Kreks, it was like watching an opponent breathe underwater while they drowned in the same sea. By now, High Command on the Kreks' homeworld faced a grim choice: commit to an all-consuming, years-long war that might bankrupt their empire or cut their losses and accept the disgrace. They debated until the arguments became meaningless. The humans would not collapse. The planet would not yield. And every moment spent debating meant more ships burned fuel idling in orbit, more soldiers worn down past recovery, more machines rusting into uselessness. Finally, the order came, not officially labeled as a retreat, but as strategic redeployment. To the Krek soldiers still capable of fighting, the wording was irrelevant. It meant leaving. It meant survival. It meant the end of a war they could not win. But as the first troop carriers lifted off, the humans made one last move. They didn't attack. They didn't block the evacuation. Instead, they simply let the Kreks see the faces of the people they'd come to conquer, standing tall, steady under the weight of their own world, watching without fear. It was a silent message. You could never break us here. The Kreks would leave Earth, but they would carry that sight with them. And for the rest of their lives, every one of them would remember the feeling of an enemy they could not overpower, not because of superior weapons or numbers, but because they had tried to fight on a battlefield that was crushing them from the moment they arrived. If you want, I can make Section 10 deliver the final HFY punch with maximum emotional weight, turning the Kreks' retreat into a galaxy-wide warning about humanity and Earth itself. The departure of the Kreks was not celebrated with fireworks or grand parades. Humanity didn't need to shout its victory into the void. The silence was its own kind of triumph, heavier and more permanent than any speech could carry. Ships that had once descended to Earth with blinding confidence now clawed their way back into orbit as if escaping a gravity well that had grown hungrier with each passing day. The war was over not because the invaders had been destroyed in battle, but because they had been unmade by the very ground they had tried to conquer. In the aftermath, humanity did what it had always done: learn, adapt, and prepare. The battlefields, still littered with Kreks technology, became study sites. Engineers picked apart armor plating that had buckled under Earth's pull, weapons that had warped in the hands of exhausted soldiers, supply drones that had drained their energy reserves too quickly under heavier air resistance. Every flaw was cataloged. Every weakness was understood. It was not spite. It was insurance. The next time, there would be no learning curve, but the real prize was the lesson broadcast far beyond Earth. Other civilizations had watched this war unfold. Some had expected the Kreks to make short work of a species still relatively young by galactic standards. Those same observers now sifted through reports that defied their tactical assumptions. They read accounts of soldiers who collapsed mid-stride, fleets stalled in low orbit, missions abandoned not due to human weapons, but because the enemy simply could not function in the environment. The story spread like a warning whispered from one system to the next. Earth was a trap. For centuries, strategic doctrine among the stars had revolved around ships, fleets, and firepower. Few considered the planet itself as the deciding factor in a war. Humanity had changed that overnight. Earth was no longer just a homeworld. It was a fortress, one whose walls were not stone or steel, but the very physics of its mass and atmosphere. Invading meant surrendering your own body to forces you were not built to endure. No amount of bravery or advanced weaponry could change that. On worlds where the Kreks still held sway, the veterans of the Earth campaign became living proof of this truth. Their posture was stooped, their movements slower, their once proud armor now stored away like a relic of shame. They carried the weight of Earth in their bones, literally. Medical scans showed microfractures that would never heal, muscle deterioration that no therapy could reverse, cardiovascular strain that shortened lifespans by decades. To speak of Earth was to taste bitterness. To plan against humans was to measure the cost and find it too high. Humanity understood the strategic value of this perception. They did not boast in the galactic councils, nor did they threaten their neighbors outright. Instead, they maintained an unyielding calm, as if daring someone to try again. Trade expanded cautiously. Diplomacy was conducted with deliberate patience. And always the unspoken reminder lingered. We do not leave our homeworld undefended, because our homeworld is the defense. For the younger generation, the war became a point of identity. Children grew up hearing how their parents and grandparents had stood firm while the invaders faltered, how humanity's endurance had proven greater than alien might. They trained not just for space travel, but for survival in extremes. Gravity. Drills became a rite of passage, teaching them to function under forces even greater than Earth's, ensuring they would never be the ones crushed by an environment. This cultural hardening was as much a weapon as any fleet. The Kreks never returned. Perhaps they calculated that another attempt would fail for the same reasons. Perhaps the humiliation was too great to risk repeating. Whatever their reasoning, they left the solar system in silence and avoided even the outskirts of human territory. Their map still marked Earth, but not as a target. It was annotated instead with a simple classification: high-risk planetary. Environment. Hostile native species. In that designation was an admission they could never speak aloud. The humans had won, and they had done so without ever needing to chase their enemy into space. Over time, Earth's victory became more than a historical event. It became a deterrent, woven into the political fabric of the galaxy. Strategists cited it in debates about planetary invasions. Generals studied it to understand how an underdog could turn the natural order of war upside down. And in private, leaders admitted they feared humanity not just for what it had done, but for what it might do if provoked again. If this was what they could achieve without leaving their world, what could they accomplish if they brought their strength to someone else's doorstep? In the quiet that followed the war, humanity did not relax. They built faster ships, stronger defenses, and deeper alliances. But the most powerful safeguard remained unchanged, a planet that demanded strength simply to stand upon it, and a people shaped by that demand since the dawn of their existence. The galaxy had learned the hard way. Some battlefields you could choose, but Earth would always choose itself. And so the warning endured, passed from fleet to fleet, whispered in war rooms and strategy halls: never fight the humans on their world. For on Earth every step is a battle, every breath a strain, and every moment a reminder that gravity is patient, and it will crush you in the end.